Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the National Championship preview and prediction, the last game of the college football season. Two teams remain, and it is Georgia 14-0 SEC champs and TCU 13-1. Georgia has beaten Tennessee and Ohio State, good wins versus 10-win opponents. TCU beat Kansas State and Michigan. Georgia is trying to defend their national championship from last season, while TCU is trying to win their first national championship since the 1938 season. So a long time coming. The Cinderella versus the Goliath. David versus Goliath here. I'm going to give you some team stats, some player stats, and then I'll give you my preview and prediction for this game, or my prediction for this game. Points per game, Georgia is getting 39.4, which is ninth in the nation. They're giving up 15.9 points per game, which is fifth. Yards per game, 495, which is eighth. Rushing yards per game, 202, which is 22nd. Passing yards per game, 293, which is 15th. TCU is getting 40.4 points per game, which is fifth. Defensive points per game, they're giving up 27.2, which is 64th. Yards per game, 474, which is 13th. Rushing yards per game, 205, which is 19th. And passing yards per game, 269, which is 29th in the nation. Now, I know these teams played in different conferences, different styles of play, different opponents. I get that, but we got to start somewhere. Defensive yards per game, Georgia gives up 318.2, which is 10th. Defensive rushing yards per game, 84.7, which is first. Defensive passing yards per game, 233.5, which is 74th in the nation now after playing LSU and Ohio State back-to-back. Their average has gone up pretty considerably. Which again didn't bode well for them versus Ohio State, doesn't bode well for them versus TCU in this passing attack that they have, and they're actually more balanced. They can run the ball, unlike Ohio State. Defensive yards per game for TCU, they give up 402.5, which is 83rd. Defensive rushing yards per game, 156.8, which is 71st. Defensive passing yards per game, 245.8, which is 91st. So you see a discrepancy there that favors Georgia in the statistics. Let's talk about individual players now. Stetson Bennett is 68%, 8.9 yards per completion, 23 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He also has 54 rushes on the season, 166 yards, 8 touchdowns. Max Duggan for TCU is 64%, 8.9 yards per completion, 32 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. He has 127 rushes this season for 461 yards and 8 touchdowns. The running game for Georgia. Kenny McIntosh has 779 yards now, 5.5 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns. Dejon Edwards, 739 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, 7 touchdowns. Kendall Milton, 559 yards, 7.5 yards per carry, and 7 touchdowns. And Branson Robinson, 288 yards, 4.7 yards per carry, and 1 touchdown. Also, wide receiver Ladd McConkey has 6 for 120 yards. I thought I'd mention that, and 2 touchdowns. Running the ball for TCU, Condre Miller is questionable going into this game after coming up a little bit gimpy versus Michigan in the semifinal. He has 1,399 yards, 6.2 yards per attempt, 17 touchdowns. But backing him up, Amari DiMarcado came in and did very well against Michigan. He has 622 yards, 5.8 yards per carry, and 6 touchdowns. Behind him is Amani Bailey, 241 yards, 8.3 yards per attempt, and 2 touchdowns. Let's talk about the receiving cores. Georgia's leading receiver is tight end Brock Bowers, 790 yards, 14.1 yards per attempt, per catch, 6 touchdowns. Running back Kenny McIntosh is second, or actually he's behind Ladd McConkey. Wide receiver Ladd McConkey has 674 yards, 12.7 yards per completion, and 5 touchdowns. And then McIntosh has 505 receiving yards, 12 per reception, and 2 touchdowns. And then tight end Darnell Washington has 426 yards, 15.8 yards per catch, and 2 touchdowns. He is also questionable and day to day going into the national championship game. Along with for Georgia, while we're on injuries, Ladd McConkey is also day to day. Michael Williams and Warren McClendon all day to day. I expect all 4 of them, everyone that is questionable, to play in this game. I mean, why wouldn't they? It's the last one. Lay it all out on the line. For TCU, I could not find a tight end that had any significant yardage, but, when you have wide receivers like they do, you don't really need one. Quentin Johnston, 1,066 yards, 18.1 yards per catch, 6 touchdowns. Tay Barber, 605 yards, 16.8 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns. Darius Davis, 430 yards, 11.6 yards per catch, and 5 touchdowns. And Savion Williams, 392 yards, 13.5 yards per catch, and 4 touchdowns. Now, defensively, Georgia's is better statistically, and if you just look at the recruiting rankings over the past few years, they've been dominant. I mean, they're not as dominant as they were last season when they won the national championship, but they're still really, really good. And TCU's defense is opportunistic. They get 1.5 takeaways per game, and their offense only gives up 0.9 giveaways per game. Georgia, their defense takes the ball away 1.2 times per game, and their offense gives the ball away 1.3 times per game. So, it comes down to, can Georgia take care of the ball like Michigan could not? Georgia had that big comeback versus Ohio State. Michigan could not. So, there's a difference there between Michigan and Georgia. It's going to be tough for TCU yet again. I don't think Georgia's going to spot TCU 14 points like Michigan did on pick sixes, which is why I have Georgia winning the game. And it would be really sweet if it was as epic and thrilling as the semifinal games were. A 1-point victory for Georgia and a 6-point victory for TCU. I think it's going to be a little bit more than that. Sorry, TCU fans. TCU does adapt and evolve, but I think Georgia wins this game 41-33. 8-point victory for Georgia. It'll be close. It'll come down to, the fourth quarter. But that's just what I have. Georgia is a more complete team, which is why they were able to come back versus Ohio State and win that game. I have Georgia winning their second national championship and basically taking the throne from Alabama and starting their own dynasty moving forward. And it's going to be hard for anyone to top them. But if anyone can, I think TCU has a pretty good shot. So there you guys have it. Remember to like the video, share with others, subscribe if you have not. Thank you if you have. And y'all have a great day.